Got it?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Today we have a very special guest, Cheng Yu. Cheng Yu is a Beijing-born and London-based pipa and guqin virtuoso, ethnomusicologist and specialist of Chinese music. Cheng Yu, welcome on Classical and Beyond. It is such a pleasure to have you on board today. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me today, and I'm very excited to be on your show.
Oh, me
Yeah,
too. It's
great.
such a pleasure. We're very thrilled that you're here with us today. Thank you so much. Cheng Yu, can you tell our listeners where you are talking to us from currently and a bit about yourself and your musical story?
I currently now based in northwest London, a very beautiful and traditional town called Pinner. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I came to UK, London from Beijing in early 1990s. Came here to have an opportunity to study in the West to see how Chinese music can be heard and developed, and how it can be fit in the Western world. So yes, I started to play music by myself and studied in SOAS, gave me a very good platform to meet many interesting people and to see a lot of different people that playing music from all different parts of the world. So I worked with some very famous musicians, including at WOMAD and WOMAX. I had the opportunity to work with some of the leading Chinese musicians in the UK. We set up our Silk String Quartet, which is a new form of group who available and had a similar educational background in China and UK. We formed in 2007. We have been so lucky to be selected by WOMAX Festival to play Chinese music and made CDs. We have also had the Silk and Bamboo group made our debut CD under ARC label. I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to work with some musicians from all over the world in London. And I have worked with very fun cellist Matthew Bally with our Silk String Quartet, and also worked with Damon Albarn for our collaboration project. The Journey to the West is a pop opera. We worked with many non-Chinese musicians, pop musicians, and we toured Europe and also USA. And that was really eye-opening experience for me. I worked with Peter Weigold's third orchestra, which is we had 22 musicians from many different parts of the world, and it's a very unique project. We performed in Barbican in 2019. And also we played our Silk String Quartet played with LSO String Quartet. We had a East-West a concert in St. Luke's in 2018, and we had a composer, Kai Ting Song, who composed an octet piece for the two different string quartet. That's really interesting. So that's very lucky to be able to work with those different musicians from different culture backgrounds.
How would you say it is important for other musicians from all kinds of diverse backgrounds to collaborate with each other?
I would say for all the musicians from different cultural background to respect your own tradition and also be open-minded to learn and experience, collaborate creatively with other musicians, because now the whole world is become smaller and it's like a big globe, and music does not have the limitation of the national boundary. So it's such a good platform for everyone to do anything more creatively and more imaginatively. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I absolutely agree. Cheng Yu, for those who don't know these instruments, the Chinese names of these instruments, could you elaborate further? What is the erhu, the guqin?
Yeah.
Can you tell our
Yeah.
listeners?
Yes, basically in the ancient time, we classify an instrument according to the material they were made of. For example, strings were used silk to make strings in ancient China. So we call all the string instruments silk. So like silk string quartet and silk and bamboo is silk. It's like string and wind. So all that kind of interesting classification, which is very different from Western way. And the erhu is two-stringed violin or fiddle, and you have a one single ball goes in between the strings, and you pull sound one string, you push sound the other strings, and it has very kind of sentimental and human-like voice sound quality. Pipa is a four-stringed lute, like I have here. Show you. The pipa is a very interesting cross-cultural instrument. It came from originally from Silk Road, from Persian, while Central Asian and Northwest China, and arrived to China. So it used to be held like horizontally, played with a large pluck drum, and the head is just like the wood, bends 90 degrees backwards, and now the pipa is like this. It's very unique in the way we play the tremolos that way, and we added so many string frets on the body, and we almost abandoned the plucking, use large pluck drum. Now we use fingers, so the head now is straight. Guqin is the mother of the Chinese string instruments. The history goes back to at least 2,500 years. The Chinese character music perhaps had very, very close connection with these instruments. Is have silk on the top of the wood. That's on the oracle bones recorded how music it is. So this we think is just based on this instrument. And it has 7 strings, tuned pentatonically, had 13 dots, we call it hui, on the board. Unlike the guzheng zither has bridge, this is flat, and so you actually slide a lot to make this very continuous sliding sound, and it's traditionally associated with scholars' self-cultivation, like qin, qi, shu, hua. So the 4 elements for a traditional scholar. The first one, you need to know how to play guqin. It's qin, qi is Chinese chess, go, yeah. Shu is calligraphy, hua is ink painting. The guzheng, the Chinese guzheng, is a 21-stringed zither. Yeah, and you have the bridge across the board, and you actually pluck your right hand and you bend the instrument strings by pushing down and giving a very unique bending notes. And it's tuned pentatonically, like many Chinese other instruments. Pentatonic traditionally actually associated with Chinese concept of how the music skill is based. Basically have close connection with our cosmological thinking of how the universe and made of. So 5 elements we call it 五行. So 金木水火土. 金 it's metal, 木 wood, 水 water, 火 fire, 土 is earth. So this is the 5 elements that actually correspondence with the pentatonic scale that we used mostly in folk music.
I love how poetic that is and how it steeps into such an ancient tradition there, because I mean, I know the scale is based on 5 notes, but I didn't realize it was based on the 5 elements as well. That's beautiful.
But it's not to say Chinese music only have 5 notes. Actually, it's much more complicated than that. We have a heptatonic with 8 notes. We have all the microtone notes, bending notes. It's not just simply a 5 notes music for Chinese. Some people think Chinese music only have 5 notes.
Cheng Yu, since you have been involved in both Chinese traditional music that goes back thousands of years, and also collaborating with Western classical musicians with their traditions steeping maybe a few hundred years, do you notice a big difference in the approach and the tradition in both cultures?
Yes, I can offer some thinking from my own experience. Yes, Chinese music is more based on sort of your emotional level and your natural conception about sound. For example, our music is more melodic, it's more coming from heart, and we less pay attention too much of the harmony and all those formulas, and it's basically from your heart. And we do quite a lot of semi-improvisatory music based on your own interpretation of the music, and also the main difference we learned by heart and by oral transmission in the beginning. But Western music, to me, is more scientific, very kind of organized, formalized. You can have harmony and counterpoint and rhythmic divisions, very prescriptive, very clear, and it's strong and it's dynamics and all of that. Chinese music, if you see the traditional Chinese music, we don't have a rhythmic division that clearly. We don't have a phrasing. We don't have a dynamic indication, and we also don't have time signatures. And that's why how musicians play the same traditional score, they interpret it completely different. Obviously, the notes is the same. So it's more about your own aesthetic thinking about how you interpret this music, how you put yourself into this music. And that's very different. And we actually, when I was young, I need always to sing the melody first and memorize it, then play. And we don't really allowed to you take a score to play while in the performance. So everything learned by heart, memorize it, playing many times, and until you really nailed it. And those things are quite different from Western music, I think, in my opinion.
And these melodies that are passed down thousands of years, I'm guessing it's an oral tradition. It's not written down?
Yeah, it's written down. It's written down, but it's like serves most Chinese folk music or classical music. It's written down as a skeletal notation framework, not as so detailedly described as Western notation. It's so detailed. If you play with the composer's signature, the dynamics, rhythm and everything is so subscribed, very, very in details. But in Chinese music is not like that. And also, we don't have a composer's name in the traditional pieces until 1950s, because in the past, musician is the composer. So music comes from yourself, not coming from somebody else then gave to you. But only in the after 1950s, the conservatoire style is established in China, and we adopted this system, and we separated the players' role with composers. So I don't know if this is a good thing, but I really do think that if you're a musician, you can compose music and from your own experience and your knowledge and all that.
I love that. I absolutely agree. Coming from a classical upbringing, I think I was very much, of course, I was educated in the Western way. So composing and improvising seemed a bit foreign. But the moment I started to explore that, I realized how freeing it was as an artist, and especially trying to embrace my roots as well, my traditional Chinese roots. I
Yes, lovely.
was really open to a whole new world of exploration, and this tradition that is passed from generation to generation, primarily orally, is a very great way for musicians to find their own voice. So this is wonderful to hear.
Important.
I have a question for you as we leave our listeners. Do you have any words of advice for musicians from either culture or from any culture of music, whether it's traditional Chinese music or Western classical traditional music? What advice would you give to our listeners to inspire them?
Respect your culture, your root, your tradition, open-minded, and to work hard and work with following your heart, and your passion is most important, and something you want to do and keep going it for it. And yes, don't just stop because of other interruptions, and you will always get there. In Chinese, we have an idiom that says 3 feet ice doesn't come for 1 day coldness.
3 feet ice doesn't come for 1 day coldness.
Yes.
That's such an interesting expression.
Yeah, it's different. It just means that, if you want to accumulate your music, you have to be always keep going. The ice sort of accumulate for this thick, but it doesn't come from 1 day. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cheng Yu. What a pleasure. We are so grateful to have you today as our very first traditional Chinese musician. So on the pipa, this is quite new for us, and it is just such a pleasure to listen to your experience and your wonderful music. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me.